Well, hey there. Welcome to another episode of Java with Julie. I'm your host, Julie Slattery, and this podcast is an outreach of authentic intimacy, a ministry dedicated to helping you make sense of God and sexuality. Hannah, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks, Julie. Anytime.
Yeah, we've been hanging out quite often lately.
I know. Do you have something you want to talk to me about that you keep asking me on, or you just are like,
can't get enough of you.
Let's keep bringing her back.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm coming back. And today I'm coming back with a little throwback. Julie, I, as a millennial, get a lot of targeted Instagram videos about what it was like growing up millennial, which just is a sign that I'm getting older. Because when you're a kid, they don't make videos like that. Do you know what I mean? Because you're living it.
Yep.
But now that, we're all turning 40, there's throwback stuff.
You're all turning 40. I'm not.
You've passed the 40.
Yeah, I'm way fat. Way fat.
Not much.
Yeah, quite a bit.
But anyway, today we're doing a little throwback, thinking about those early 90s, 2000s times.
Okay.
Or as my kids like to call it, the 1900s, whenever they talk about when me and Caleb were born.
I love it.
Okay, so if you grew up in the 90s or 2000s, just a little, just like to prickle your ears of the throwback, that little feeling inside of you of nostalgic childhood, sounds we remember. Dial-up internet. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the noise that AOL made when it was connecting? Mm-hmm. Yes. Or getting kicked off the internet when someone picked up the phone.
Yeah.
That always happened. Another nostalgic, we think about the clothing, the layered tank tops. I was really into the popped collars.
Yeah.
Long necklaces. Yeah. And then one more. I was thinking senses, the smell of Blockbuster.
Do you remember? Smell of Blockbuster.
Yeah, do you remember?
I don't remember the smell.
There was a smell.
I do not remember that.
It just smelled like VHS tapes and plastic.
What does that smell like?
I don't know. Maybe I'm unique in this. But anyway, I was thinking of those, throwback nostalgic things. But today we're going to talk a little bit about not just life in the 90s, the 1900s, and the 2000s, but if you grew up in the church, what it was like. So you might have remembered listening to Adventures in Odyssey, some of those like Christian throwback things. And another thing we're going to talk about, not as fun as Blockbuster. We're going to talk about purity culture.
Yeah. Well, a month or so ago, my friend Dana Gresh was on the podcast with me. We were dissecting some of the good and the bad and the ugly of purity culture. And if you didn't listen to that episode, we're going to link to it. I highly recommend you listen to it. We're not going to rehash that. But particularly today, what I want to talk about is how purity culture messed with our understanding of sexual desire. And what does it look like to approach sexual desire from a healthier perspective, and I would say perhaps even a more biblical perspective. So that's the direction we're going to go.
And Julie, I know that even with Dana, you talked a lot about this, but it's kind of crazy how this concept was everywhere in the evangelical church. It wasn't just like a once a year teaching. Like this whole idea of purity culture shaped how so many of us, of my generation, thought about our bodies, thought about God, thought about sexuality. I mean, it was everywhere. It was like a flag of this time of life. So tell me more then about where we're going to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it, Hannah, I maybe just missed it. So, I remember growing up with some vague messages about purity and safe sex for marriage and things like that. But I don't think it was full on like for you all, where it was everywhere you went, there were those messages. And so you were impacted by it more. I was probably more impacted by the silence of the church. But I know your friends. I mean, you grew up in church culture, so...
I grew up in church culture and Christian school.
Yep.
I had a double whammy, Julie. So, I mean, it was really coming from all directions. Which, to be honest, when I look back on it, you know how sometimes it's a little fuzzy when you're looking back? I'm like, I don't know, probably kept a lot of us from having sex and fooling around. Like, how bad was it? But turns out it wasn't great.
Yeah. I don't know if it affected you as much, though, because I know your parents knew your dad, and he was like,
For anyone who knows my dad, that's a hilarious comment. But for those of you who don't, let us explain.
Yeah. your dad, who was my uncle, he talked about sex more than anyone I ever met and more openly than anyone I ever met.
Yeah, I don't know why, Julie. I don't know where it came from, but for some reason it was a topic my dad loved bringing up. I was 16, sitting in a car dealership with a guy trying to sell me a car. It was me and my dad sitting across from the table, which you always know is a weird experience when you're trying to buy a car, but I'm 16 years old. And somehow it comes up that my dad's been married for 25 years and he's asking him about it. And my dad's like to this complete stranger across the table sitting next to his little 16-year-old daughter. Like, you know what? The secret to every good marriage, lots of Jesus, lots of sex. That's about it. That's all it is. We focus on those things and it's good. I was like, ah! But that was everywhere for me.
No, I remember him talking about him and your mom would always have like naked hot tub time and go to bed naked. And it's like, I don't want to know this. So,
yeah, and I'm the daughter, Julie.
I can't imagine what that was like for you.
All that.
So I feel like that probably balanced out all the messages you got.
But for those of you who did not have Steve Ripka as your dad, purity culture could have been a little bit confusing, a little bit disorienting.
Yeah. Because what your dad was saying, and sometimes maybe over the line saying a little inappropriately, that he was celebrating the goodness of sex.
Yeah.
You know, and I think purity culture had, particularly women, but I think guys too feel like there's something about sex that is just inherently wrong and shameful. And there's something about my sexuality, my body, my desires that maybe God can kind of wave a magic wand and redeem it in marriage, but at its core, it's not a good thing. And to have that opposite message of what we would call today now like sex positivity was probably a really good balance. Something we missed.
You're totally right. That balance is a good word for that. So then let's go back to what you said at the beginning. You were like, let's not rehash, so much of what you talked about, Dana, but that you wanted to focus more on what purity culture taught us about desire.
Yeah.
So why the word desire? Why does that stand out to you when you think about the impact of purity culture?
Yeah, I think we can look at anecdotal evidence of, people who grew up in religious settings around that time frame really struggling with, I don't know what to do with my body. I don't know how to go from saying to myself, no, I can't have this. This is wrong. To now being like, yes, this is not only acceptable, but it's supposed to be really good. How do I make that switch? And then I think even female desire, like even thinking that is a God-given and good thing. And so we've got anecdotal evidence of that where people will share their stories and a lot of shame around even their journeys around sexuality that followed them into adulthood and perhaps marriage. But there's also research, and that has been done. A really well-known book that came out a few years ago is called The Great Sex Rescue. I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with that book, and I've read that. It's been, I think, enlightening to both men and women. But some of the research that came out of that particular study by Sheila Gregor and her daughter and coworkers there was that if you grew up in a religious setting, particularly around these generations, women were more likely to have painful sex. They were less likely to be satisfied with sex or to enjoy sex. And she's not the only one that has done that research. That has been kind of confirmed by other people who have started to dive in the effect of religious teaching on sex that particularly was focused on abstinence or chastity or purity. So it's a real issue. And it's something that if you haven't personally experienced, it's good to know that this is something that a lot of people are wading through. And it causes them to doubt God's design for sex and doubt biblical teaching around sexuality.
Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it? I mean, if you picture the individual with that negative experience after quote unquote following the script, it's like, I did what I was supposed to do. I took in all this teaching from my church around purity. I didn't engage, or maybe did with regret, some sexual things before marriage. And now, why does it feel horrible?
Right.
Man, I can think of so many friends, Julie, as you're reading those statistics and talking about that. One who very much experienced that and I remember just having so many open conversations about exactly what you're describing, the desire. Being like, I don't even know how to make this feel like a good thing because I was just told, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. I can also think of some friends, Julie, when I think of their parenting style, really swung to the other side, even as people who love God, because they experienced that like harmful side of purity culture, that even how they engage and parent with their kids now is so sexually open.
Yeah.
Which makes sense when you think about those statistics that they're like, I don't know, that one didn't seem to work. Let me try the other one.
And it's not just, I think, parenting, it's also some of the church voices have swung to the other extreme too, of saying like, hey, this whole thing of restricting sexual behavior, it hurt a whole generation, particularly of women. Let's help them embrace their sexuality. And I've read books from pastors and Christians who are on the more liberal side who would say it's actually good for you to experiment with your sexuality before marriage. It's good for you to sleep with different people and figure out what you like and awaken your sexuality. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you know that's 100% not where we stand. We really do believe that the biblical ethic of sexuality is not just a rule-based thing, but it actually is part of the revelation of why God created sexuality in the first place. But I think we've got to have empathy for why people have come to that conclusion and really just accepted that what the Bible says about sex isn't good for particularly female sexuality.
Man, and Julie, I just think about how much this connects to other episodes that you and I have even done recently about when we've talked about in marriage when sex is done out of obligation versus out of desire.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the heart of even what we're talking about with this today. It's like when we haven't been taught that anything about the desire is good, it even impacts in our own marriages this like obligatory sexual attitude.
Yeah. And I would say, I think it's both and in marriage. You know, I think when we read scripture faithfully, there's an obligation to nurture sexual intimacy in marriage. There's an obligation for you as a married woman or a married man to nurture each other's sexual desire and your own sexual desire for one another. So this isn't like, well, if I have no desire, like we can just go 2 years and we're fine. No, this is an important part of marriage, but desire is an important part of your sexuality. And for most women and for some men, that desire isn't going to just naturally appear. It's going to have to be fostered.
Yeah, so how do we do that? Like, let's say for the person listening who can relate to these purity culture messages and say, yeah, Julie, the desire was killed. Anytime I had any sexual desire, I was told that was literally from Satan. I mean, I was told that is evil in you. That is always sin.
Yeah.
And now 10, 20, 30 years later as an adult, I'm still feeling that way around sexual desire. Like, how do I even begin to redeem that?
I think one of the ways is by calling out the lies. So you just said, Hannah, I've been told that my sexual desire is from Satan. Where do we get that from? Is there anywhere in the Bible that tells us sexual desire is from Satan? You know, sexual desire, if we understand it, it comes from even a hormonal shift that happens in adolescence where there's testosterone and there's estrogen and you have sex characteristics and parts of your body that start to develop. So was that Satan's idea? You know, that when you hit adolescence and puberty that there's this awakening? No, like if we look at that biology, that was part of God's creation. And so I think it's identifying the lies that really have more to do with maybe church messaging and even church tradition than biblical truth. So what do we do with the Song of Solomon? You know, I mean, if you're believing sexual desire is bad, what do you do with that?
Yeah, they never mentioned Song of Solomon in any of the purity culture years.
They're like, hey, there's this book. Someday you can read it when you're married.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there are all kinds of lies, Hannah, that are embedded in purity culture.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a woman's job to keep a man from stumbling. And then when she gets married, if she gets married, it's still a woman's job to keep her husband from stumbling by being sexually available. Like, that's all kind of twisted in there, or just the idea that the most important thing about you is your virginity.
I mean, that was a big one in purity culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that play out in the experience of like your subculture and friends?
I just remember, and this is no, hate to the groups doing this. Like, it's hard to talk about purity culture at times because I'm like, I don't want to bash these people. But when I think about these memories from my junior high and high school experience, I remember being at an event where we were all given bubble gum. We all chewed on the bubble gum. And then you had to, like, every time they like rang this bell, take out your bubble gum and hand it to the person to your right. And then you had to take the bubble gum from the person on your left and eat it.
Really?
Yeah. And we had to pass this around the room.
You're kidding.
No. And this was taught at my Christian school. And the object lesson at the end was they were comparing it to being sexually promiscuous with people around you. And we're like, would you rather be that chewed up piece of bubble gum that was passed around the room or this fresh piece of bubble gum up front that no one has touched on your wedding day?
Boy, there's
and I was like,
so
I
much
think
wrong
I
with
want
that.
to be the new bubble gum on my wedding. I mean, that's just like a normal day in health class at Christian school for me.
I can't get past all the germs, though.
You know what? That was pre-COVID years. They were real loosey-goosey with the germs.
That was before they discovered that you can actually pass germs through your saliva.
It was an object lesson,
yeah,
Julie.
there you go. In health class, nonetheless.
It was in health class.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
No.
So, I mean, there's just so many pictures like that where there was object lessons all the time. I mean, I can even think of more where they gave you this example of this like pristine thing or this crumpled up thing. And it was like, this is the person who saved themselves and this is the person who didn't. Which one would you like to be?
Yeah.
It's kind of intense, isn't it?
It is really intense.
And horrible.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the messages of identity that's sending.
Oh, man.
Not of behavior, but as that represents me. And both of those pictures of identity, the scripture tells us are wrong. First of all, the pristine one is like the religious leader who thinks, well, I did it all right. And, I deserve this, that, and the other thing. I'm a good person. And then you've got the other individual who doesn't have their virginity, who's like, well, I'm always going to be at best on God's plan B for my life. And I'm not like these other people. And so there's so much wrong with it. And again, we've had podcast episodes that have dived more deeply into that and the importance of understanding that our purity comes from Jesus and all that. But
you're not bubblegum, guys, listening.
Yes.
You're not
You're
the
not
bubble
even
gum.
the best bubble gum. Like, probably not the best word picture there. Hey friend, Julie here. I just want to pause for a minute and share something with you. If you regularly listen to Job with Julie, you may have noticed that we don't have ads on this podcast. And that is on purpose, because I want this to be a space where we can talk very openly and safely about God and sexuality without distraction. But that also means that this podcast is supported by listeners like you. At Authentic Intimacy, we're seeing just how much these conversations are needed. So many people are looking for clarity and hope and a place just to talk about these difficult topics through a biblical lens. If this podcast has meant something to you, would you consider partnering with us as a monthly donor? Your support helps us continue creating content like this and reach even more people who are searching for truth and for healing. As a small thank you, I'd love to send you a copy of my newly updated book, 25 Questions You're Afraid to Ask About Love, Sex, and Intimacy. You can become a monthly partner at AuthenticIntimacy.com/give, or just check out the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for being part of this community. Now back to my conversation with Hannah.
So, Julie, I know that when you've taught more on this, sometimes the question you'll get when this is coming up around our sexual desire, how we've been educated on sexuality, what we do with purity culture for those of us who have walked through those years. You use this phrase, sexual integrity, that you bring that up a lot in kind of proposing something a little different from
Yeah.
like sexual purity. And I think even when it comes to how we think about and deal with sexual desire.
Yeah. Yeah, what I think is interesting, Hannah, the Bible uses this word purity in different ways, like purify yourself. The Bible, as far as I can remember, never says be pure. It says to pursue, purity of heart, but it does say be holy. And you say, okay, what's the difference between be holy and be pure? Being holy is to be set apart. It doesn't mean that there's never anything wrong with you. It means set apart for a specific purpose. And that is God what is calling us to. He's like, you are not of this world anymore. I've taken you out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. You are a holy priesthood, a royal nation. Therefore, be holy. Be set apart as God is holy. And I think we've got to start with that God's call in our life is that we begin to see that we no longer belong to ourselves. And that means that we don't write our own rules about right and wrong. It means we can't make ourselves whole. It means I am called to give myself completely to the Lord. And in reality, that journey of giving myself completely to the Lord and becoming set apart for Him is a lifelong process. It's a decision, but it's a decision I have to make over and over again, but it's also a process of God working His holiness in me. And so when we talk about sexuality, this idea of integrity is that I want to get to the place where my whole life makes sense. Like the story of my life is I am saved by God, I'm redeemed by Jesus' blood, I'm forgiven, and I now belong to Him and He belongs to me. And so if that's true, then integrity means that my whole life is reflecting that. I'm not just whether or not I'm a virgin, but how do I love people? How do I respond to my husband? How do I show grace to people? What do I do with my wounds from the past? Am I still stuck in shame? Am I letting the enemy have footholds in my life? So it's far more than just don't have sex before you get married. It's a all of life call to be set apart and to be transformed by the Holy Spirit who dwells within me.
Which it makes sense then, Julie. I mean, that's like a beautiful picture you're painting for us. And the beauty of that is that any person, any age, any stage of life can have that call.
Right.
I think the difficulty that a lot of us experience with purity culture is the finish line was marriage.
Yeah.
It's like our whole goal with my sexuality is to keep it locked down until I'm married. And then I reach the finish line. And then we've heard from so many men and women who enter marriage so confused on what to do.
Right.
Because it was like, this was what I was taught, is just make it.
Right.
And it's hard over here somehow, Man, and I know, Julie, I mean, even with this bigger picture around like desire and what that looks like, I love thinking about that within the context of what you're talking about, of this like whole life holiness and unity with our Father.
Yeah.
And what does it look like to bring and understand and grow in the area of sexual desire within that context,
Yeah, so, even in Song of Solomon, the bride says, my desire is for my beloved and his desires for me. So we see that word and we see it played out in that love song, between the husband and wife. And they don't necessarily acknowledge God. I mean, God is sort of overseeing all this, but this is just about their love for each other, and it's how they nurture their desire for each other, how they enjoy one another, how they engage in the senses together, how they get lost together. And so we've got this picture in the scripture, like this little book of poetry that really, honestly, if you look at the whole Bible, it feels like it doesn't fit. Like there's no other book like that in the Bible. There's no other book that is just about a human relationship. And here we have it's an erotic poem between a husband and wife on how to enter into desire and fully enjoy their sexual relationship, which is so amazing. I almost feel like it's sort of like a a picture of what your dad did for you was, hey, you're going to hear all these messages about what not to do, but I want to give you a very emphatic example of why this is good and what it looks like to celebrate the goodness of this gift that God has given us in marriage.
Which, you know what? It came with a little embarrassment, but big picture, you're totally right. I mean, I see it. It's like, I agree with you. I mean, I think without that messaging coming from somewhere in your life, then you're right. The like purity culture wins a little bit more in your head, that it's just about shutting it down versus the enjoyment. Yeah,
boy, like I said, I didn't fully grow up in the purity culture, but I did grow up with a lot of silence. I grew up with a lot of just safe sex for marriage kind of implications and talks and things like that. And I struggled with a lot of this for many years in my marriage, like having the positive view, particularly as a woman, of sexual desire. And I've shared on this podcast and books that I've written that Linda Dillow was really influential for me. She was like the Uncle Steve, in my life, where, she would ask me like point blank questions about what was happening in my marriage. And she was just a good example of an older godly woman who was all about like, this is important to pursue and celebrate. And I think we all need that message because it's so confusing to have only the world talking about the goodness of sex and the church mostly talking about where it can go wrong. And so it makes us feel like every sex positive message is somehow skewed, because that's been our experience.
So if someone's listening to this, Julie, and they are involved in a small group, part of a life group, part of a Bible study, part of a group of friends that gets together somewhat regularly, can we start bringing this up in those settings?
100%, yeah.
How do we do that with a mixed company? Is that a good idea?
Well, is this a marriage study?
It feels like a purity rule I'm not allowed to break, that I can't bring up anything like this around another boy.
Really? Where did you get that rule, Hannah?
I don't know. My own awkward idea. I don't know. I was just thinking for our listeners who are saying like, me and Julie, I love that idea of what Linda Dillow's relationship was to you in this area. Is that always one-on-one? Could this be done in groups? Like, how in general as the church can we be like, okay, let's walk the other way. Let's not just talk about the purity culture. Let's not just talk about what could go wrong, but how as a church body could we start bringing this conversation in a positive way?
Yeah, I think there are definitely ways that we can have open conversations about what the scripture says about sex in mixed audiences, like even teaching through the Song of Solomon. And in that situation, you're not disclosing intimate parts of your own marriage. You're not overstepping in ways that could be harmful. You're setting the tone of this is what the scripture actually says about the beauty of married sex, and that this was God's idea, and he created your body, and he gave you these hormones, and it was his idea to create the climax and the orgasm, which people are like, what? So when you hear that from the pulpit, or you hear that in a context of teaching, there's sort of a cognitive dissonance that you're pushing on. Like, I don't know how to reconcile holiness and sexuality. But then I think when we get into the more specific conversations where people might share, I think that's where you have to be more intentional about saying, okay, women need to have these conversations with other women, men need to have these conversations with other men, or we need to do this maybe in a marriage setting. And at Authentic Intimacy, when we run groups, we have a group contract that kind of goes over some of the basic rules of here's what is okay for you to share, but here's what we'd ask you not to share if it's too specific. So because these conversations aren't modeled in a healthy way in church, I think we have to start modeling them. And
we don't know what we're doing.
No. And it's like, and then people feel really bad if like, oh, this is the place I get to share. And then they step over a line and they overshare. And then, they kind of get their hands slapped like, oh, that was too much.
Yeah.
So I think setting the guidelines of what's appropriate and what settings is really important to keep people safe and also to model for them. How do we have these very honest conversations in a way that's edifying?
Hey, and it sounds like a great place to start is like, let's start some more Song of Solomon studies. as
There
a
you
group.
go.
Like,
Yeah.
crack that open this summer, guys. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a reframe. It's a Song of Solomon study, but I think also, as the church is engaging more in this topic, there are more and more books and studies that are giving people language and guidelines for even thinking with a different theological framework than maybe they grew up with, where it was just like sex is bad, unless you're married, and then somehow it's okay to enjoy it. And what I'm so passionate about is discipling people in their sexuality. And so singles need to be discipled in, what do I do with these desires? How do I understand them? How can I honor God without shaming my body or automatically assuming all of this is from the devil?
Yeah.
And then married men and women need to be discipled in, what does it look like then to awaken desires in a healthy way and to nurture those within marriage?
Julie, I liked even when you were talking about this idea of a life of holiness. You kind of started to paint this picture for us of this like invitation we experience from God from every part of our life. Like it isn't these siloed areas, that it's like we actually get to live in union with God in all these different pieces of our lives. What do you think it looks like for those who are listening when it's something so personal?
Yeah.
Like when we think about this within sexuality or a lack or a confusion around sexual desire, how does that look to invite God into that area?
Hannah, it's been interesting to me to explore this. I've been doing this ministry now for 14 years. And if I could go back in my time capsule 14 years ago and listen to some of the things I say today, I'd be like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe you're saying that out loud. Because I am a product of church culture too. And I really struggled with this. And so it's been fascinating for me to see and interact with people, some who are on this journey with me, who listen to this podcast, who go through books and studies, who are like nodding their heads, and then others, particularly when I go speak somewhere where they've never heard this, like the shock that they have when you start to equate covenant and sexuality with it being a metaphor of God's love, or when you encourage people to pray about their sex life, or you encourage couples to pray before they have sex. They're like, why would you do that? Like, that's just weird. And so you might be feeling that as you're listening. You're like, this just all sounds really weird to bring this before God. Like, I think maybe I'm more comfortable with just the rule-keeping perspective. But I think what we've got to realize is we've been discipled over decades to separate God and sex, to keep our sexuality in one part of our lives and God in a different part of our lives. And it feels like this is not a part of my existence and struggle that I could bring to church. It's not a part that I could bring to the throne of God when I pray to him. But I think some aha moments for me was, first of all, Psalm 139, where David is writing about God's intimate knowledge of him. And David is saying, where can I go from your presence? And before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. That God knows our thoughts. He knows everything about us. And if you apply that to this conversation, God is with you when you're looking at porn. God is with you when you're struggling so much with that lust that you're trying to manage. God is with you when you and your spouse are engaging sexually. Like, he's there. So it's not like you're inviting him in, you're acknowledging his presence. And I think sometimes we need to sit with that and recognize that God isn't ashamed of our sexuality. It was his idea. And that he's there for the purpose of redemption. He's there for the purpose of empowering us and helping us to know truth and celebrate the good gifts that he's given us. And so I think when we start to intentionally even use our imagination to recognize the presence of God everywhere, now we become more confident to say, you're here, Lord. There's nothing I can hide from you. Would you help me? Would you help me to experience the redemption that your word promises? Would you help me and my spouse navigate this difficulty we have? Would you help me understand my sexuality as a good gift, even though I'm single and I don't know what to do with all this desire? And that really is a discipleship process that isn't just about being in a small group. It's about really learning the truth that God is invested and cares about every aspect of your life.
Man, how different, Julie, of a framework that description is that you just gave us versus this behavior modification plan of rules to follow. I mean, that's just two totally different planets of what you're describing.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful invitation.
It is. And you said it earlier, Hannah, anyone at any stage of life with any past can do this. Can say, I want to be set apart for God, and I want to recognize his presence and his power in this area of my life.
Man, Julie, well, thank you so much for helping us talk through so much of that. And I hope for you as a listener, if you remember some of these things we talked about at the beginning of the episode, silly as they were from growing up in church culture at times, I hope this message, you really hear that invitation of what this looks like, this beautiful invitation from God. So, man, well, thank you guys for listening. We would love to know more about what stood out to you about this episode, what has stood out to you about these conversations. So we would love you to leave a rating and a review. We just really enjoy hearing your feedback, and it helps get these conversations in front of more people who want to hear about this, just the goodness of God and what that looks like within sexuality. We also would love for you to pick up a copy of Julie's new book, 25 Questions You're Afraid to Ask About Love, Sex, and Intimacy. Some of what we talked about today even comes out of conversations in that book, so we'd love for you to get your copy. We'll put that in the show notes. Click it there, get your copy. Julie, it's so fun to see all these people cracking open the cover of 25 Questions.
Yeah, boy, that's heartwarming. And as always, you can find lots of information like blogs, Q&A videos, other podcast episodes like this one to help you navigate what it looks like to be set apart and to really pursue sexual integrity. You can find all that at our website, AuthenticIntimacy.com. And Hannah, thanks for diving in with me.
Anytime, Julie.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.